Hi, I'm Arjen Wals from Wageningen University in the Netherlands and from the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. And I'd like to talk about a chapter I co-authored with friends from and colleagues from Australia and from the United States on critical environmental education. You may wonder why critical environmental education, and I'd like to address that. I think if you look at the history of environmental education, you can say, well, long ago in many countries, maybe over 100 years already, we started out with nature conservation education. People were concerned about the loss of nature and the disconnect between people and nature. Over time, as we got more exposed to industrialization, air pollution, pollution of waterways, of soil, and toxic substances entering our bodies, we shifted a little bit from nature conservation education to environmental education, where we were concerned about environmental behavior. The question became, how can we actively engage citizens in changing their lifestyles, their environmental behavior, use less energy, start being more careful about waste, starting separating waste, recycling programs, campaigns to keep water clean. And these kinds of programs were much more focusing on a change of people's behavior. Then you could say in the third phase of this history, we got into issues of social justice and equity, inequality, where people started to think more about how does the life that I lead impact the lives of others, but also how does it impact other species, and how do the lives of people elsewhere in the world affect the way we can live here? How do we have impact on the world, not just in today's world, but also in the future and for future generations? So this is where we start thinking more about sustainability, you could say, and we start also thinking about how do what is keeping us from changing? What kinds of systems, structures make it difficult for us to become more sustainable, to become more environmentally in tune, in harmony with the world around us? So now it becomes environmental education, becomes more a question of how can we empower people so that they can make a difference in their own communities, but also how can we maybe disrupt and change the structures that keep us from becoming more sustainable. And this is where the critical element comes in. Do we enable people, young people included, to become more critical of the systems and structures that force us to become unsustainable? And can we redesign these structures so that we can transform our communities to breathe sustainability? And this is where we talk in our chapter about what we call ecologies of learning. We recognize that this type of learning and engaging people actively in these issues requires that we blend formal, informal, and non-formal learning. It requires that we start boundary crossing between different disciplines, that we start connecting water with energy, with climate change, with food and nutrition and well-being and social justice issues, that we must approach this holistically, but that we also must learn to become more critical of ourselves, of the values that we live by, the kinds of values that we are pushed to live by. And this is where the critical environmental education is crucial. And there are many examples of this. If you look at, for instance, schools that are trying to convert their school grounds from being rather concrete, sterilized places where you don't have any biodiversity, to redesign these places so that they become more conducive to biodiversity, but also to play and towards connecting with the local community. Or guerrilla gardening, where citizens claim broken places, as you can say, and there's ecological restoration that sometimes meet resistance from stakeholders in the community and require multi-stakeholder dialogue to negotiate a way to use these spaces to become more generative towards sustainability and community well-being. So these ecologies of learning that we need to create require us to think about how to use people's own experiences as a starting point for learning. It requires the interrogation of our values that we live by. It requires interrogation of the structures that force us to live in certain ways, but that can also be redesigned to become positive and conducive towards sustainability, using multiple media if we can, social media, to connect with one another, to exchange data, to also monitor our own environment using citizen science, using our smartphones to monitor, say, water quality or monitor air quality, and use the data to confront maybe public authorities or businesses that they need to change. So this type of activism and ICT driven activism can be a powerful mechanism for bringing about change. Critical environmental education is really about combining new forms of learning that can begin to bring about meaningful change to the whole community. It's about transgression, changing and disrupting systems. It's about transformation, and it's about transdisciplinarity. And the basic idea behind critical environmental education is that it's not always about doing the things we do better, but also about doing better things altogether. And that requires questioning the assumptions and the values that we live by.